Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the IEEE-USA Legislative Update for September 1st, 2022. I look forward to answering any of your questions. If you have any, feel free to put them in the chat. And let's get started for today. So as many of you are probably aware and following, we're awaiting the launch of NASA Artemis. This is an uncrewed mission and the first in a series that will eventually send us to Mars. And we are waiting to watch the next launch attempt, which will be Saturday. We're also excited to watch the results of the 10 CubeSats that are going up into space, and then also hopeful that the orbital debris issues and the engine bleed issues can be resolved, and very much applaud our members who have worked so tirelessly on this big project and are looking forward to a successful mission in the coming days. As many of you are aware, and I did cover this in a previous legislative update, but I wanted to touch on this. The White House did release a national orbital debris mitigation plan. And so as we look at orbital debris issues in terms of the launch, just as you all are aware, there is quite a bit of it, and that does affect the launch itself. But the White House did issue a mitigation plan, which improves component design and mitigation debris creation, but also establishes best practices and tracks orbital debris. Since I covered that in a previous legislative update, I just wanted to put the slide up there with kind of the components of the plan itself, but to mention that was part of the discussion of the launch for sure. Speaking of the White House, OSTP did issue an open access guidance this week. The issue is that a memorandum went out to all of the different federal research agencies to make federally funded research available to the general public. That has always been the case, but in terms of our publishing business, there was originally a bit of time between the availability of that research and the publication. And now the White House is saying that federally funded research should be available to the general public immediately. So this is a bit of a change. And IEEE is still going through the guidance and looking at kind of the effect on our publishing business, but also what happens in terms of our relations with the research agencies. So agencies will, for example, be required to update their open access policies. There will be an established transparent procedure to ensure scientific and research integrity. And then agencies must coordinate with the Office of Science and Technology Policy, also known as OSTP, to ensure equitable delivery of federally funded research results and data. So currently there is now no embargo on the free and public release of federally funded research. So that is a bit of a change, and we are certainly looking at kind of the documents that have been released, and then also seeing where IEEE will be affected. Speaking of, again, the White House, they issued an executive order on the CHIPS Act, which of course has been a legislative priority for IEEE for quite some time. So this executive order highlighted that CHIPS will strengthen manufacturing in the industrial base here in the US, as well as bolster our tech leadership and create our own jobs in the US as we look at the supply chain issues that the CHIPS Act does address. The executive order establishes a CHIPS Implementation Steering Council within the Executive Office of the President, and that will be in consultation with industry, higher education, and research institutions, including IEEE, hopefully. Implementation priorities were also outlined in this executive order, and they include protecting the American taxpayer, meeting economic and sustainable national security needs, of course, ensuring long-term U.S. leadership in the microelectronics sector, catalyzing private sector investments, benefiting the small business community, particularly in the U.S., as well as strengthening and expanding regional manufacturing and innovation ecosystems. So Russ and I have both talked at length about the CHIPS Act in our legislative updates, so happy to answer any questions you might have on that bill. But I did want to mention the executive order that was issued recently. So in terms of the CHIPS Act, what we're looking into now is CHIPS authorized as well as appropriated various funding programs. So what that means is in some cases, there's real dollars attached to some of these programs, and Congress will have to appropriate that money. In many cases, especially within the Department of Energy, within NIST, and within NSF, the bill authorized but didn't appropriate. And so just as a quick outline, for those of you who are looking at kind of the dollar amounts and the dollar money that was listed in CHIPS and maybe interested kind of how your programs are being affected. So in terms of the authorized, so not real dollars, some of those programs included the energy and security and innovation provisions for the Department of Energy, the Emerging Tech Transfer Program at the Department of Energy, the MICRO Act, which we were very supportive of, the National Nuclear University Research Infrastructure Reinvestment Program at the Department of Energy, and then Fission for the Future, also Department of Energy, the entire NSF for the Future bill, so all of the NSF reauthorization. That's an authorization, not an appropriations bill, as well as the NIST for the Future bill. So NIST, again, has many, many programs, particularly in manufacturing, which was a priority in the bill, but these programs are now authorized and not appropriated. So Science for the Future, which is a Department of Energy piece of the CHIPS Act, or CHIPS Plus Act, I should say, was also, again, authorized but not appropriated. So in terms of what was appropriated, we will look at the development of the domestic manufacturing capabilities, so especially for semiconductors and microelectronics. R&D and workforce development programs were in fact appropriated. The CHIPS for America Defense Fund, so that's a program at the Department of Commerce, that was in fact appropriated. CHIPS for America International Technology Security and Innovation at the State Department, and then the entire creating helpful incentives for product semiconductors at the NSF, and then Public Wireless Supply Chain Innovation Fund at the Department of Commerce. So these are programs that received real funding, and IEEE was, of course, incredibly thrilled to see that real funding attached to some of these incredibly important federal programs. But as we move forward in our innovation advocacy projects, we do need to consider that, again, these programs here at the Department of Energy, at the NSF, and at NIST were not actually appropriated. And so that's what our advocacy moving forward is now, to make sure that real dollars are in fact attached to all of these great ideas and these great projects to improve the US in these areas. And so something to consider as you all maybe consider contacting your member of Congress is to talk about the real dollars necessary for the Department of Energy, for NIST, and for NSF, so that the programs in cybersecurity can be in fact funded, so that the programs in microelectronics that are within these agencies can also be funded. And so it's that's moving forward. That will be our advocacy strategy as it relates to the CHIPS Act, and certainly welcome any of your insights into how these programs affect you all. It's always great when we can go into a member of Congress's office and relay a story of one of IEEE's members and how the federal funding directly benefits their district, of course. So if any of you are looking to get involved in advocacy, I would strongly recommend reaching out to our government relations department and maybe telling some stories about how some of this federal funding directly affects you all. A quick appropriations update. So right now, the appropriators are, of course, talking. And so we have the CHIPS Act that passed. We have a lot of bills that just passed right before Congress went out on recess. Some of them have certainly a lot of energy provisions in them. Others have, the semiconductor piece. But now we're looking at appropriators. And the appropriators are currently in ongoing debates between House and Senate, Democrat and Republican, as to what funding levels they should appropriate for these programs. And unfortunately, an omnibus is probably the most likely option that we will see this fall, but they are still ongoing and debating. And so we will see where they fall in terms of actually assigning real dollars to some of those programs that we advocated for. And then in terms of discussions between the House and the Senate, those are of course ongoing. And we are reaching out to both houses and both chambers to see where we can influence the appropriation cycle at this time. In terms of one of the appropriations bills which we follow, which is the Commerce, Justice, and Science Appropriations Bill. So that includes NASA, it includes NIST, it includes the NSF. So those are in fact those negotiations are being affected by the executive order that I mentioned earlier on the guidance to publishing. They're being affected by the CHIPS Act. And so the appropriators are now looking at the difference between the authorized and appropriated programs within CHIPS to try and find the funding for some of those key programs that we advocated for so long. And then the other recent bills in terms of energy provisions and clean energy. So those are also, of course, being debated in the appropriation cycle at this time. So we are looking forward to working with Congress on a potential omnibus package, but also just the appropriation cycle in general. And then as a quick update, the NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act, is also an ongoing bill. There's really no change in between the two legislative updates, today's and the last one. So I don't have a slide on that, but those discussions are still ongoing. And we are again working with the House and the Senate on the National Defense Authorization Act and look forward to a final bill later this fall. So that ends my very quick legislative update. Congress is, of course, still in recess, but they will come back again this fall. And so I will have more information for you at a later legislative update, but I'm certainly happy to answer any questions that you might have. And again, encourage you to reach out if you're interested in advocating for some of these programs that we chatted about today. I see some questions in the chat, so I'm very excited to see some of you. So I did put in the chat the White House executive order on the implementation of CHIPS. The executive order, the link is there, and then the other links to the other documents that I mentioned are actually in the chat as well. So the guidance on federally funded research is also in the chat here. So I do see a question from Brendan Godfrey, so thank you so much. Looking at, let's see, the question, the STEM green card provision of the House Competes bill did not make it into the CHIPS Act, CHIPS and Science Act, of course. Any chance that that will be added to other legislation? That's a really good question, Brendan. So right now, I think kind of the debate on the CHIPS Act and the CHIPS Plus Act, as you mentioned, are in fact closed. And so Congress is really going out for re-election. And so this is one of those things where there are in fact many provisions that over the course of the CHIPS Act debate and discussions, some of those last minute provisions did not end up in the final bill. And so in terms of the STEM green card, that is one. There's a lot in terms of the EPSCoR provisions that we were looking at in terms of NSF. That debate was so ongoing and so intense that also did not make it into the final bill. And so these are things that we will work on in the next Congress, is basically the short answer to your question, I should say. So I would say this is something that we can work on moving forward, particularly in the new Congress. But unfortunately, this year I think we are out for such provisions and such legislative kind of agendas. Congress is really focused on getting reelected, but next year we might have a chance. So thank you for that question. Do I see any other questions? Oh, I do. Is the NSF for the Future Act a part of the CHIPS Plus Science bill? Yes, it is. So that bill, as I mentioned, was an authorization bill, not an appropriations bill. But what it does is it authorizes a lot of different programs at the NSF. And so we were very thrilled to see that. In terms of kind of legislative process, of course, the authorizers do have to come up with these program changes and the authorization levels for them. And so the CHIPS Act definitely did that and definitely accomplished the necessary step of authorizing and changing some of the programs within NSF and within NIST and with DOE. So not to say that we weren't thrilled at the authorization, but now as we move forward, IEEE is going to look at the appropriation side of things and actually assigning real dollars to some of these programs. So yes, the NSF for the future is in fact part of the CHIPS Act. but it is authorized and not appropriated. So thank you for that question. Do we have any other questions? Feel free to ask away, those of you who are interested in the chat. My email is also available, is up on the screen. And so feel free to email me if any of you are watching at a later time and wish to ask any questions. Certainly happy to answer them that way as well. Oh, I see a question from Will Robinson. Hi, Will. What is the status of the OSTP nomination? Excellent question. So it looks like the OSTP nomination, so this is the Office of Science and Technology Policy Director. The last director ended up leaving the post, and so obviously the White House had to nominate a new person. So that person has gone through the Senate, but then we are waiting for the final full Senate confirmation. And unfortunately, that's kind of being held up by congressional recess at the moment. So definitely a non-controversial nomination, and looking forward to supporting them when they are in fact in their post. Well, I'm not seeing any other questions, so I will end today's broadcast, but certainly thank all of you for joining, and wish you all a pleasant long weekend. Hopefully a successful launch for those who are involved in the Artemis program. Thank you so much. Have a good one.
With the advancement in new technology, the landscape for power systems is changing very rapidly. Information technology has really made a huge difference in enabling some of the things that we work on. I've been able to leverage IEEE-USA to be in the leading edge of my industry. IEEE is all about a sense of community. I am learning ideas and concepts and thinking completely out of the box. IEEE-USA is my competitive edge.